you actually mentioned James Burnham, and that's an interesting segue. He was a critic of liberalism. He defined it in a way where basically that the Western civilization sees the political horizon, and they deny the fact that there are enemies out there, and that's
Yeah.
sort of what he saw liberalism is. So like liberalism is not the enemy.
Right.
The left is the enemy. The liberals basically just deny that there is any enemy at all, and that we
Right.
are breaching various unbreachable principles by engaging in politics. And that was sort of James Burnham's point. So maybe interact with that a little bit, and then talk about why is liberalism coming into question, and why is it a good time to recover the insights of someone like Burnham.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think first of all, like the average person who's operating here, and I'm not necessarily saying this is James in this case, but a lot of people who are participating in these debates don't even understand in any serious way a difference between the left and liberals, which is you and I recognize these are entirely different categories, right? And that in many ways the liberal is the dupe of the left, right? And they kind of always have been. I'm just blanking on the guy who wrote I think it was Paul Kengor, maybe, who wrote the book Dupes, about basically how the kind of the liberal, broadly speaking, left of the mid 20th century was constantly a dupe for the actual communists who were happy to use them. So I think you do have those very different groups, but we are challenging this kind of liberal notion that I mean, obviously, and you and I may have even slightly different stances on this, obviously, but I think sort of more broadly, I'd say that I'm certainly critical, and I would imagine you're critical of this kind of liberal notion of the neutral public space, that we can just have the contest of ideas, and that's how things work out. I think we're more sensitive to power relations in the way that Burnham was, in the way that Burnham student Sam Francis was, that all sorts of things, like that kind of come into play. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that this is, this is an important distinction. And I think, again, people on, in the establishment are just very uncomfortable when you challenge any of the 20th century liberal consensus that even people who think that they are on the right are basically, in many cases, unconsciously buying into. And by the way, I mean, I probably challenge that consensus less than some other folks in our world, but at least I do recognize that it's a consensus and that it's fine to interrogate it. It doesn't make us bad people to interrogate it. And arguably, we need to overthrow that consensus to some degree if we're going to make any progress.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree with that, and I know Andrew does too. But the 20th century liberalism, I think it's unable to recognize civilizational enemies, and more importantly, as a consequence of that, it's unable to act in a way that would actually secure our way of life and the things that we hold dear. I mean, they really do not like the idea of this is one of the ironies of it all. So the 20th century, in my opinion, was largely like a massive project of undermining the old constitutional norms. And anytime we recognize the fact that these enemies, the domestic enemies who basically dominate the administrative state, need to be pushed back with power, we're blamed for breaching the Constitution. The very Constitution that has basically been liquidated first in the New Deal, then in the Civil Rights Act, and all the bureaucratic machinations that were set up during the Civil Rights Act. If you oppose that, you're seen as a racist and all these things. But like the 20th century is this massive project of undermining the old republic, and we need to recognize that and be very serious about the fact that only power can confront power. I mean, this is a classic Burnham insight.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And again, right, as you point out, I mean, every single one of the founders would be, possibly excepting Jefferson, would be a right-wing Christo-fascist and even Jefferson would be canceled for all other reasons.
Probably,
yes. Yeah.
But I think this also comes up. Yes, I mean, we need to confront power with power, and we just need to be very honest about where the country has gone. And I think at the same time, I mean, this kind of bleeds into a lot of the debates on Christian nationalism, and I know that you guys have been very involved in that. Right? It's just that we when even somebody like me, who's probably less, purely in the kind of Christian nationalist camp than maybe you guys or some of our mutual acquaintances, but somebody like me is like, well, we're not in a neutral public space that bears any resemblance to what the constitutional order was. You can go back in history and find all these Supreme Court decisions, and these didn't start here, but from the 1940s to the 1970s, that simply radically inverted, the fact that Christianity and religion had always been in the center of American public life from the founding.
Yeah.
If we're trying to kind of get back to a status quo ante, that doesn't make us, some sort of people who are outside of American tradition. And indeed, I mean, this is all trivial for you and probably even most of your listeners. But for those who don't know, right, like we had official state churches up into the 1830s in the United States. So this notion that somehow, it could even be in question that invoking a god or even invoking a Christian god in a public context could be unconstitutional. It's just risible, and it doesn't matter whether that offends the sensibilities of people who've been indoctrinated by this mid-20th century consensus. That's the historical reality, and we need to use power to push back against that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's totally true. And, even if you disagree with the founding generation or something, the argument that it's like anti-American to push this,
beyond the pale.
That's beyond the pale. Like maybe you don't like that. Maybe you see the collapse of the old constitutional order as a good thing. Okay, that's a different debate. But history's on our side.
Yeah,
we're the ones defending the original republic, and we're pushing back against its liquidation.
Right. And what you see right now in the public square is a different religion. It's the religion of transgenderism. It's the religion of homosexuality. It's the religion of everything else that is
abortion rights. Yeah.
I mean, that's the God, or secularism. Quite frankly, that's the God that we need to worship right now. It is not a public square with no God. It's a public square with a God that is antithetical to the God of the founders that for the country that they thought they were founding and that existed in the United States. And so it's sort of recovering that. And at the same time, I think we need to be realistic. I mean, I use the term rolling back the clock. I actually kind of want to back away from that slightly because I actually don't like that type of terminology because you can't reverse the sands of time. It's getting to a new place that is some sort of a synthesis, but that at least recovers to the maximum possible extent the sorts of animating principles that founded the country. But recognizing obviously that we're in a different situation and we're not going back to some sort of magical status quo ante, no matter what the ante you want to choose is.